we have the dubious honor of going last, but I feel like our panel is like actually so relevant, and so I'll get started, and you can tell all the other people about it. One thing I wanted to note, I don't know a lot of the other panels, you couldn't ask questions, and the thrust of our panel is to get through some slides, introduce our topic, and then have you ask questions. So I don't know if you have the app, but please ask questions, and if a lot aren't coming through, I might even say, hey, raise your hand if you have a question, because I always find it hard to use the app myself. But to introduce our panel, to my right, we've got Richard Matsui. He's worked with me at the Loan Programs Office at the US Department of Energy, and he's currently working there. He's generously filling in for a woman named Jen Downing, who wrote the VPP Liftoff Report. And so he's expert in finance, but not necessarily VPPs, but knows a thing or two, and he's going to present on that topic. And the way our panel's working is kind of like big picture national. Richard's covering that. Beren's also covering the big picture as well as some Hawaii-specific topics, and then Will from Hawaii is going to focus more on VPPs that are currently happening in Hawaii, and the whole panel will then have a discussion. So that's Richard. Beren on the far end is visiting. I conned him into coming to Hawaii from New York, a long flight, but I promised I'd take him surfing, and I filled that promise yesterday, and he did quite well. And Beren's with Keys and Fox. Keys and Fox, I've been doing energy in Hawaii since 2003, and I believe Kevin Fox was there in probably 2005, but their firm is the leading firm nationally when it comes to energy policy, litigation, and just working to provide distributed generation. And Beren specifically is fast becoming the expert on VPPs, so we're lucky to have him. And then Will is with Yamamoto, Caliboso, and their firm is I would say, the firm that you go to in Hawaii if you want to do a large-scale energy project as well as other types of energy projects. And he's here with us today from Oahu, so we'll get started. So I don't know where the clicker is. I think I wasn't given the clicker. So this is, and now I'm going to introduce myself. So this is a picture of, whoops, go to the next one. There. This is a picture of me. This is the very first battery system that was installed on Maui and potentially in Hawaii, and this is in 2016. And I put this picture out there just to sort of relay a few things. One is that this is relatively new, and it's really changed the face of solar in Hawaii, and the battery's just been a game changer. So when it first, I just noted a few dates just to sort of level set where we're at. When this battery came out, it was because net metering had ended, and you could not export one electron. That was the concern. And we're literally at the complete opposite talking about VPPs. It's not about you can't export, it's we want that power, and we always knew that the grid would want that power, but when the grid needs it. So I think that's the point of this slide, but just in terms of, we went from self-supply, no export, to smart export during the right times, or get paid, sort of incentivized to export at the right times, to battery bonus, which really was only 2002, right? So not that long ago was the first VPP program. Well, there was one before it, but the first one that really attracted a lot of customers. And that program is still active, and we'll talk about that. If you are interested, if you're from Maui signing up, there's still an opportunity to enroll in that program. And the successor program, BYOD, just launched, and we'll talk about that. And another thing to note here, just big picture, is that 95% or more of all new solar systems have a battery attached to them. And this is unheard of in the country and truly unique to Hawaii. So next slide, or I've got the clicker. And I'm going to let the panel go here really quick, but I also just wanted to help them out by like kind of giving like a really easy way to understand what the hell is a VPP. It stands for virtual power plant. We also like to call it a distributed power plant. And this is a picture of my old house, and I don't live there anymore. But if you look, there's 4 things in your house: your heating and cooling system, your hot water heater, your EV car if you have one, and your solar plus storage. If we can control those 4 things, I would argue that some of the statements the governor was making may not be true. I don't think that he realizes the potential of controlling those 4 loads could make in the near term. And they all are ready to go. We don't need to permit them. They exist at people's houses, and more of them are getting installed every day. Meaning like, more people are buying electric cars, more people are installing solar. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Richard.
Fantastic. Well, knowing that we're the last thing standing between us and the happy hour, the organizer asked me to kind of scare everyone a little bit to make sure everyone's paying attention. And so I'm going to channel my inner Ronald Reagan and utter the 9 scariest words in the English language, which is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But I am really excited to be here. So I've been now at the Loan Programs Office for about a year, where, for those who are not as familiar, Loan Programs Office is effectively the bank sitting within the US Dept of Energy. We've been endowed with approximately $400 billion of lending authority, with the mandate to advance both clean energy projects as well as clean energy manufacturing, all here in the US. Prior to that, I started and built an insurance company for solar farms, and prior to that, I was building solar panel factories in China. So, when I think about virtual power plants, it's, as Brad pointed out, it's really about providing a little bit of context to then allow the experts to come in here. If I were to summarize the national picture right now, in one word, it's growth, right? Specifically load growth, as we all know. And there's 3 trends that are conspiring to really cause this load growth. First is, of course, AI, as the governor was describing with data centers. Second would be reindustrialization of America. Given the geopolitical tensions that we all see, there has been a concerted effort to bring more of that activity back on shore. And the third is what we all know about here, which is the electrification of everything, right? But particularly when we think about electric vehicles being, of course, a particularly significant driver. So that's what's happening on the kind of the demand side, right? So what the Department of Energy sees is that in the coming years, it's about 60 gigawatts of peak demand is going to be added to our system. And so, of course, that begs the question, well, what's going to happen on the supply side? We've got some tough news there. As we all know, there's about a very significant retirement phase that's starting to occur now, both because the infrastructure, of course, was getting quite old, but also the fact that many of these assets are in fact, quite carbon polluting, right? So societally speaking, we've agreed that we need to start transitioning away from these assets to the tune of about 140 gigawatts of these assets that are slated to be retired in that same time frame. And so you can kind of start to see the challenge here, right? So on the demand side, you've got increased demand. On the supply side, you actually see a pretty significant reduction in capacity that's coming down the pipes here. And so the question very quickly becomes, well, what can we do about this? And so, one of the tools that the Department of Energy is particularly bullish on is really this concept of the virtual power plant. Really, these suite of technologies that are getting adopted anyway at incredible speeds. And so, on the mainland, we like to call the VPPs are kind of like sandwiches, but especially being in Hawaii, I feel like maybe the better way is to describe it. It's like VPPs are like rain. Right, and so in Hawaiian, there's 200 words to describe rain, right? Like there's the sudden downpour rain that we all had last week. There's the misting rain. There's the horizontal rain, right? And so it's all these different types of rain, but at the end of the day, it's all still rain, right? And so virtual power plants are very similar in that sense. So virtual power plants are this broad term that describe things like managed EV charging, EVs, batteries, smart thermostats, smart hot water heaters, like this entire suite of technologies that, like I said earlier, are really getting adopted anyway and can help us to adapt to this significant challenge that we all see coming. So to put some numbers on it, so there's approximately 5 gigawatts of demand, a flexible demand, that's coming on board in this time frame, right? So that's great. Think smart thermostats in that category. And that's going to be dwarfed by what's happening in behind-the-meter batteries, right? So obviously Hawaii is leading the way in terms of attachment rate. We see a lot of this happening in California, quickly behind. But both of those two things are actually going to get swamped by a third thing, right? Which is the prevalence of electric vehicles and, of course, managed EV charging, if we can all make that work. So there's a tremendous amount of new resources that are getting added to our grid. And part of the challenge is to figure out how do we tap into that, right? How do we make these resources actually useful, to handling this grid challenge that we're all coming into? Actually, so this has that math that I was just describing, right? In terms of the new demand as well as like that shortfall that's occurring on the capacity side. So let's talk briefly about benefits here. So when we think about benefits, I think first and foremost about just one thing, especially for Hawaii, it's just cost. And so I would say the best thing about VPPs is that they can be really cheap. So there was a study done by Brattle Group quite recently that showed that in some circumstances, virtual power plants can be 60% cheaper than traditional alternatives, right? And it's for reasons that we described, right? If it's the CapEx involved here is a smart thermostat that can control X% of a house's load, that's a really cost-effective solution, if we can deliver that at scale. But of course, there's other benefits as well, including resiliency. But another point that I particularly love is community empowerment. So a very significant chunk of the costs in running a virtual power plant are actually payments that are being made to the consumer in exchange for the ability to use their thermostat or to use their hot water as a grid resource. Right? So many of these expenses are actually just payments that are going to be made to consumers here on the islands, which is, again, really exciting from my standpoint. Finally, to get one step more granular with regards to what are the actual benefits that these virtual power plants are going to be delivering here. So the DOE likes to describe this as kind of like this shift, shape, shed, and shimmy thing. And so what we see here is, when you think about shifting, like I think to myself, EV charging, right? So the definition of a grid disaster in Hawaii is going to be when 50% of us are all using electric vehicles and we all plug that in at the same time when we get home. Obviously, is going to cause an enormous problem for all of us if that is not managed in some way. But of course, what we see on the mainland with a number of other utilities is managed EV charging programs, right? To ensure that even if we're all plugging in at the same time, that some of us are charging at 6 and 7 and 8, to kind of like spread that demand over a broader period of time. So that's on shift. With shape, I think about solar plus batteries, unsurprisingly, right? Being able to take those hours of peak generation and being able to deploy them at hours that are just going to be more valuable for all of us on the grid. When I think about shedding, I think about demand response, right? Being able to have that thermostat kind of be turned down at critical hours. And when I think about shimmy, I think about these grid resources being used to really deploy ancillary services, which we all need in order to operate any modern grid, like such as frequency response. So the last page I have here is really the takeaways that we have from this Liftoff report, which I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in this topic. As a private sector background kind of person, I was floored at the quality of the reports that this office has been putting out, especially on some of these newer technologies or concepts such as virtual power plants. I think these guys will do a much better job of walking through some of the details, but I do want to plug that report, which of course is freely available on our website. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Beren, who's going to talk about how do we actually make these work for us, Hawaii.
Great, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here with you all today and see so many familiar faces, actually in person. So thank you for having me, and thanks, Brad, for taking me surfing yesterday. You might need to go closer. Go a little there. Oh, there we go. So, as Richard mentioned, VPPs are a really hot topic right now, not just in Hawaii, but on a national level for a lot of the reasons that Richard was discussing. And chief among those being the need to meet rapidly growing peak demand while at the same time achieving clean energy and climate goals and keeping energy affordable for customers and businesses. So VPPs really enable these customer-sited DERs to help us meet these challenges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about VPPs generally operating around the country, which then ties directly into an effort spearheaded by Solar United Neighbors to develop a model VPP program that builds on best practices from some of these other programs that are operating around the country, as well as the DOE Liftoff Report recommendations that Richard just had up on the last slides. And then I'll close just by offering some thoughts on the Hawaii VPP experience in the national context. So VPPs are operating in states all across the country and have been for quite some time, actually. And I would say that VPP is sort of a new name for an old concept, essentially. Incorporate customer-sited resources into the utility planning and operations to meet grid needs that otherwise would be met by traditional utility infrastructure. You can think of traditional load reduction demand response programs that take advantage of smart thermostats and evolve that out as technologies evolve into VPP programs that take advantage of, for instance, solar plus batteries, which helps to reduce grid load and also can export power to the grid. And as the technologies continue to evolve, these VPP programs become more and more sophisticated and start to be able to provide a lot of additional services. Some of them were on the slides that Richard was showing, that shape, that shimmy, that shift, and those kinds of things. Some leading examples of VPP programs across the country. Some of them are listed here. California and Massachusetts are a couple of big ones that we look at a lot. Hawaii, obviously quite a bit of experience with VPPs here and some real leading examples as well. One of the important things about VPPs, which I think is becoming clear from this conversation, and as a lot of folks in this room know, that VPPs operate with multiple different technologies. So we talked about smart thermostats, we talked about EVs, we talked about batteries. And so it's no surprise that not all VPPs are the same. So it could be different technologies that are enabled. It's the different types of grid services that are provided, the participation model for the customers, whether it's customers participating directly or if they're participating through a third-party DER aggregator, the compensation structure and the value of the programs that are available for customers, the types of grid services and the ratepayer value, the savings that ratepayers might be getting, and whether there's an opportunity for utilities to earn a rate of return, or if there's some sorts of performance mechanisms to incentivize utilities to implement and really integrate virtual power plants into their operations and through their long-term resource planning, and to really start to think about these as a core part of how utilities operate their system. And in particular, as we think about our transition into a much higher renewable penetration types of system, and especially moving into 100% renewable energy goals, how do VPPs fit into that? So this point about not all VPPs being the same is really actually an important one as we look to scale up VPP adoption across the country. Because these programs depend on customers to participate, some principles really pretty quickly surface when we look at the programs that have been successful. For programs that have been successful in other states, some of the things that we've been seeing is that they need to be simple for customers to understand. It's got to offer meaningful value to motivate customer participation. We got to provide grid services that are valuable and needed by the utility, and that will also produce ratepayer savings. And we really need to enable participation of the DER industry partners, including aggregators, in these programs. They're an essential partner in operating these resources and maintaining them over the course of the long term so that these things are always available and that the utility can rely on them. And we need to provide earning opportunities for the utilities to incentivize them to want to integrate these resources into their programs. And the programs need to be structured, and the regulatory bodies and the regulators need to have mechanisms in place to be able to review and iterate on the programs to make adjustments as needed, whether that's in compensation rates or whether that's in adjusting how the types of grid services that are offered or adding on grid services and responding to customer needs and responding to new technological capabilities. How can we make sure that the programs are designed in a way to provide that kind of flexibility and scalability? So we've learned a lot from designing and operating VPPs here in Hawaii and around the country. And there's been a lot of good work in this space to identify improvements in program design and operations to help accelerate adoption. The VPP Liftoff Report is a great example of one of those pieces of work. And another one of these efforts is what I mentioned, Solar United Neighbors' effort to develop a model VPP program that can be used by regulators, utilities, the DER industry, and other stakeholders to develop VPPs in their states and service territories. And this effort draws from the Liftoff Report recommendations and best practices from programs around the country. And so, just really quickly to summarize it, the model VPP program that we've been working on for Solar United Neighbors it's an open access, sort of standard offer, tariff-based program. So this means that anyone with an eligible device, whether it's a battery or an EV or a smart thermostat or other non-battery resources, can participate in the program and provide grid services and receive compensation for providing those services. And all those terms and other participation terms are upfront, standard offer in the tariff itself. And so it's an open enrollment type of program. Just this slide just quickly gives you a visual of sort of the overall program architecture. And right now, the way that it's designed, the initial focus is on batteries, and then it allows the utility or the regulators to bolt on additional sort of riders for additional technologies to provide some of the same grid services that batteries may be able to provide or other grid services. And the key here, though, is that these, the way that the program is structured is to provide separate participation pathways for different types of technologies to recognize that there are different communication protocols for different technologies. There may be different compensation rates for different technologies and other program participation terms that are just based on the unique capabilities that the different types of technologies can actually offer and provide in a VPP program. So I won't go into all the specifics here, but the model program, really provides guidance on key program design elements to help create a level of standardization in VPP programs, while at the same time providing some flexibility to adapt the program to meet specific needs of the state or utility that is ultimately going to implement it. Some of you may see some similarities here between what we're describing for this model VPP tariff initiative and aspects of the Hawaii Battery Bonus Program and some aspects of the BYOD programs, and you'll notice some really key differences as well. So this really reflects, though, the idea of incorporating what has worked and incorporating fixes for what has not worked based on the experience with programs in different states. And the key takeaway here, I think, is that VPP programs operating today are not static. And they're not set in stone once adopted. They require attention, they require revisions to get them right, and they need a flexibility to meet evolving customer and grid needs. I think the battery bonus program here in Hawaii is, kind of an example of how the commission here with Hawaiian Electric and with stakeholders really took a look quickly at how that program was operating, were there adjustments that needed to be made, and worked to make adjustments to try to advance that program and make it as successful as possible. And, we've seen, as of today, there's over 50 megawatts of batteries enrolled in the battery bonus program in a very short period of time. So I'd like to talk a little bit here to sort of close this out about the Hawaii experience from a national perspective. As more and more states and utilities are looking to develop VPP programs to utilize DERs as a grid resource, it's going to make everybody's job a lot easier to have a model program to build from so that we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel in every state that wants to look at this, or every utility territory. They can actually take some lessons learned and best practices and say there are some really key program design elements that are kind of necessary to make these programs successful. And if other states have kind of gone through that process and have done that work, how can we bring that forward to the states that are now looking at that and kind of going through this process for the first time maybe, or working to advance their VPPs out of just using sort of like a smart thermostat and wanting to include a battery program, for instance. And one of the keys here too is to move VPPs out of the perpetual pilot stage and get them into fully scaled programs to really unlock their full potential. So Hawaii is uniquely positioned to enable VPPs at scale, given the high penetration of customer-sited solar and storage, the aggressive climate and clean energy goals, near-term capacity needs, resiliency needs, the high cost of electricity, customer demand for the tools to manage their energy bills. There's a lot of factors that are all at play right here in Hawaii that make VPPs a really, really important resource in how Hawaii could think about integrating these customer-sited resources at scale and doing it at a rapid pace, like we've already started to see with battery bonus, for instance, and start to incorporate those learnings to advance these programs in a way that other states simply do not have the opportunity to do yet because they don't have that level of capacity enrolled or that opportunity to bring customers into these programs to really start to have a critical test bed for how we can do this. And I think, underlying so much of this is that we know that meeting our climate challenge really requires leadership and collaboration at all levels. That's the local and the state to the national and the global levels of cooperation. But so much of our energy policy, though, is developed and implemented at the state level. And Hawaii's leadership is really crucial in demonstrating how we can successfully achieve that rapid clean energy transition. And the VPP piece really fits into that as an important wedge for achieving those goals here in Hawaii, improving that model up for the rest of the country. So the battery bonus program from a VPP perspective was a great start in enabling customer-sited batteries to provide grid services. The BYOD programs that were adopted recently are intended to build on that, but require some additional work to attract customer and industry participation. A lot of the building blocks are in place to make the right adjustments to get them to work. It's just going to take some more work and some revisions to those. And so, just in closing, I think just from a national perspective, Hawaii's experience is really important to demonstrate that these resources and that these types of programs can be rapidly integrated at scale as a grid resource on a high renewable penetration grid, and prove up this program model to provide guidance to other states as they're also working to transition to a cleaner, more resilient, and reliable electric system. So with that, thanks everybody, and I'll turn it over to Will.
Thanks, Beren. And thanks for sharing your experience with the model VPP tariff. I think that can continue to guide and inform how Hawaii develops its VPP programs for sure. And thanks everyone for hanging in there for the last session. It's good to see so many familiar faces at the conference today. I'm going to be talking about the advancement of VPPs in Hawaii. A quick overview. I'm going to talk about some of the early Hawaii VPPs, the recent launch of the Smart DER and BYOD programs, some of the opportunities ahead for VPPs, and the need to balance the priorities of different stakeholders to encourage more VPP adoption. Early VPPs in Hawaii, some may recall the Energy Scout program, and now it's called the FAST DER, or the Demand Response Program, that helped to make the grid more stable by reducing home and business consumption. For example, by remotely and temporarily turning off water heaters and cycling ACs or turning off pool pumps. There's also the power partnership programs, also known as the GSPA programs. This is where Hawaiian Electric partnered with independent companies or grid service aggregators, such as Swell or OATI, to provide grid services by managing customer systems to help balance supply and demand, also referred to as demand response or load management. And then there was the battery bonus program, also known as the scheduled dispatch program, which Beren spoke about. This program is probably considered the most successful VPP program to date, at least if you measure success by customer adoption. Like Beren said, some 50 megawatts was subscribed. And this program launched around the fall of 2021, and it was for Oahu and Maui to improve grid reliability and resiliency during evening peak hours. And basically, customers were encouraged to add energy storage to their existing rooftop solar. It could have been existing or new. And it required the dispatch of energy for a 2-hour period out of the battery, typically between 6 and 8 p.m. when the energy was needed the most on the grid. And it was for 365 days a year for a period of 10 years. Customers were incentivized. They were given a very attractive incentive in the form of an $850 a kilowatt upfront incentive. In real terms, that means, say, if you bought one battery, like a typical Tesla Powerwall, for example, rated at 5 kilowatts, you would get $4,250 upfront just for participating in the program. If you signed up for 2 batteries, you'd get $8,500. Combined with the $5 per kilowatt monthly bill credit, which amounted to about $25 or $50 a month, that almost paid for the cost of the battery after you factor in federal and state tax credits. So a lot of folks, it was a no-brainer to sign up. This was the case especially for net metered customers, those grandfathered customers who adopted solar early. They were not only able to add more NEM panels under the program, but they were also able to get a heavily subsidized battery and also get energy credits at retail rates. With respect to non-NEM customers, such as the prior programs, there was a couple of interim programs called CGS and CGS Plus. Those programs also allowed for export of energy, but the credits were a lot lower than retail rates. Those customers also benefited because the program allowed for retail rates compensation for the first 3 years of the 10-year program. And just a note on that, when the program was first launched during the first year, the compensation schedule was tied to the underlying tariff rate. So for example, if you were a CGS customer and your normal credit was 15 cents a kilowatt hour, you would get that credit. And if you were a CGS Plus customer and your credit was 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you would get that credit. And that went on for about a year or so, and I think Hawaiian Electric and the stakeholders noticed that there wasn't a lot of adoption going on. There wasn't a lot of take and subscribing to provide their battery as an energy grid resource. And so partway through the program, they adjusted the credit to provide for that retail rate for the first 3 years. And I think after they did that, customer adoption picked up rapidly. And so from around mid-2022 to the end of the program at the end of 2023 on Oahu at least, a lot of non-NEM customers started to subscribe and participate in the program and allow their home batteries to contribute energy and serve the grid for the 2-hour period every evening. On Oahu, some 47 megawatts out of 40 megawatts of total capacity was enrolled as of May 7, and the applications ended at the end of 2023. On Maui, it's a little bit different. On Maui, some 8 megawatts out of 15 megawatts of total capacity have been enrolled as of May 7, and applications are actually still being accepted until June 30, 2024. So for you Maui folks who are interested or thinking about a battery, now's the time. Moving on to BYOD, effective April 1st, 2024, was the launch of the Smart DER and BYOD 1 programs. Smart DER came in 2 flavors, the export flavor, and the non-export. These were largely similar to the prior interim programs, such as CGS, CGS Plus for the export, and CSS, or customer grid supply, for the non-export. But with respect to BYOD, this is essentially the next evolution or the next transition over from battery bonus after battery bonus ended. So BYOD 1 is the only level of BYOD that's currently available at this time. There's a total of 3 levels, BYOD 1, 2, and 3. BYOD 1 encourages the installation of a new energy storage battery or other smart technology. It could, for example, be an EV or other resource providing energy to the grid. If you participate, you could receive an upfront incentive at $100 per kilowatt, capped at $500, and a monthly incentive at $5 per kilowatt. You would also receive energy credits based on time-varying rates set at 3-year intervals, and the credit amount is tied to the smart DER evening peak rate. So if you look at the top right side of the slide, you'll see that the evening peak rate for Oahu, for example, was around 33 cents. And for Hawaii Island, around 22 cents, and on Maui, 23 or 18 cents. And it does require dispatch at a specified 2-hour period, 365 days a year, and it's a 3-year commitment. It does require an advanced meter, and participants will be auto-enrolled into a program called Shift and Save. Some of you may recall the pilot TOU, or time of use program, where energy costs were cheaper during the daytime and more expensive in the evening. Shift and Save is sort of the next version of that with Hawaiian Electric. But participants do have the option to opt out of that Shift and Save program. And BYOD is designed to support grid reliability and load reduction. So that program just launched. It's only been around for about a month or so. And it's too soon to say whether there's going to be any significant adoption of that program, but already there's many stakeholders who are greatly concerned that the value proposition to customers won't encourage wide enough adoption. Oftentimes folks will say, let's compare this to the battery bonus program. And there were some lessons learned back then when it was originally designed. There wasn't a lot of adoption amongst those that were non-NEM customers. And then after they made adjustments, all of a sudden you'd had that higher adoption rate. Same thing here. The question is whether the incentives are great enough to encourage enough adoption for BYOD 1. And also you can compare against the average retail rates. So, at least in 2023, for Oahu and Maui, the average retail rate was 43 cents a kilowatt hour. And on Hawaii Island, 47 cents a kilowatt hour. So those retail rates are a fair amount higher than the rates you would get credited for if you were to participate in these programs. So if you were a home or a business customer looking to install and commit some of the energy out of your batteries to the grid, the question to you is, what's the value proposition? Why would I give my valuable energy to the grid and get a value that's less than the value of that energy if I were to just use it on my own, for example? And then there's the next 2 levels of BYOD, BYOD 2 and 3, which are under development at this time. These are intended to have remote dispatch and control capability. So a little different from BYOD 1, where that was designed for a set scheduled dispatch 2 hours a day at the same times every day. BYOD 2 and 3 have that remote dispatch and control capability. The implementation of how that gets done is currently being discussed by the PUC, the Consumer Advocate, Hawaiian Electric, and the DER parties. Under consideration are specific communication pathways, such as whether to use API or IEEE 2030.5, whether to utilize aggregators as dispatch agents versus utility direct dispatch. As currently defined, participants are limited to the utility customers who can receive on-bill credits, for example. There's currently no mechanism to provide program payments to aggregators. So There's some things that still need to be worked out with respect to BYOD 2 and 3, but it's in the works. VPPs present a significant opportunity for improved grid reliability and resiliency. To date, there have already been helping to provide grid benefits, but in a passive manner, for example, the scheduled daily 2-hour dispatch from batteries. But advances in battery technology now make it possible to allow the utility to have active control and remote dispatch capability. So for example, instead of the scheduled 2-hour dispatch for system-wide load reduction, the utility can call upon and export energy if and when needed, for the duration needed, and to address localized grid needs. Also, fast frequency response service can also be added for automatic response to any grid frequency issues. There continues to be a lot of national attention on the Hawaii experience. Much appreciation should be given to the PUC, Hawaiian Electric, and other stakeholders for establishing the policy and framework that paved the way for VPPs and getting us to where we are today. The battery bonus program, for example, was considered a huge success and put us on the map. However, the adoption of VPPs going forward, I think, will largely depend on striking the right balance to sufficiently incentivize adoption and participation. The grid value will likely need to match up with the customer value to make that happen. And I think there's going to be a need to balance the priorities of the various stakeholders to encourage VPP adoption. The level of VPP adoption and participation is likely to depend on finding common ground among the varying priorities of the government, the utility, homes and businesses. You know, the government or the PUC may ask, you know, will ratepayers at large benefit from, you know, a handful or a segment of homeowners and businesses who provide these grid services? Or would it be less costly to, for example, install a peaker plant and have that rate-based? You know, so these questions will come up. A utility, for example, may question how practical and feasible will it be to remotely dispatch and control and keep track of tens of thousands of customer-sited batteries during emergency grid events? Or are there any financial incentives for the utility, performance incentive mechanisms and such, tied to the utilization of BYOD resources in order to provide those services? And homes and businesses will likely ask, do the incentives and credits make it worthwhile to give up a portion of battery energy storage to provide grid benefits instead of using that valuable energy for themselves? I think we could look at what other states have done to implement VPPs and see, you know, what sort of balance they struck. But ultimately, we should be mindful and independently consider the right balance for Hawaii. I think if VPPs are to gain adoption and become a true resource, customers will need to sufficiently be incentivized to participate. Thank you.
So, I've got some questions here from the audience, but just to kind of level set, we've got about 15 minutes left. So in terms of answering the questions, just to get through them, we should try and like keep it relatively short, but you know, so, like be thorough. So I'll just like focus on some audience questions here. One person asked, with the high penetration of Hawaii residents living in multi-unit dwellings and or renting, how are those community members, how do those community members factor into VPP conversation or the VPP conversation?
I could take a stab at that. I think that the program structures that are in place today probably need some additional work to create the program frameworks for those multi-family housing type of customers to be able to participate in the VPP program. Right now, it's a little bit more targeted to single-family homes or small commercial, you know, kind of individual customer bases.
I can add to that. So I think, at least in Hawaii, at least I tend to think more about solar plus batteries, which of course very quickly brings you to that divide that this person is referring to. I think it's worth noting that in California, at least, there's a startup called OhmConnect that's been quite successful at deploying, or rather getting subscriptions from smart thermostats. And so actually their biggest user base, when I spoke with them last, it was actually renters in lower income areas for which OhmConnect was able to offer them effectively capacity revenue in exchange for using their smart thermostats at those critical hours. And so being able to see a grid resource come from renters in low moderate income places getting payments from the capacity system it feels like it checks a lot of the boxes I think that many of us are looking for when we're thinking about what the transition should look like.
Great answers. The next question is, how can VPP programs be expected to succeed without retail rate crediting as a minimum baseline? And to sort of, I guess, explain this question a little bit more, it touches on what Will was talking about. Currently, the BYOD program doesn't credit customers at retail when they export power. And so to use the word of my friend Mark Duda, who is an economist, it's reverse arbitrage. You're selling low and then you're forced to buy high. So I guess you guys can take this question, but it's getting to that, like, will these programs be enrolled if you're sort of not given the right economic incentive?
Yeah, I guess maybe kind of I can take that in kind of two parts. First, by example, that we know from the battery bonus program that was largely enrolled by exponentially greater NEM customers were enrolling in battery bonus because they got the one-to-one credit for their energy exports during the grid service event. And then when the changes were made to provide for the retail credit for the first 3 years of the program, that did encourage some non-NEM customers to enroll. However, that proxy value, that retail credit value goes away after their first 3 years of participation, and so they will experience that loss, that reverse arbitrage that you described. And on balance, we saw many fewer non-NEM customers sign up for battery bonus. And so I think that tells us that customers are doing the calculus and saying, I'm not sure that this makes sense for me if I'm participating in a program where I charge my battery and then I provide that energy for 2 hours, I dispatch it 365 days a year. So contrast that with many of the other programs operating around the country where the battery is targeted for more of a seasonal kind of dispatch style, and you're looking at seasonal peaks. So New England and Massachusetts, for example, customers have, you participate between 30 and 60 events per year in the summer peak season. In Massachusetts, all customers are on net metering as well, so they still also get that one-to-one retail credit. That's by way of example. I think what we're seeing now is, in the BYOD programs, the bring your own device, the sort of next iteration, that the overall program value is substantially lower than the battery bonus program, and on top of that, the retail credit for those energy exports during the grid event is not provided. And so it's fairly simple for a customer to kind of do the calculus and say, if they wouldn't have done it in battery bonus, it's very difficult to think about a customer wanting to do that under the BYOD structure.
Thanks for that. So just looking at these questions, I'm trying to sort of, a lot of them kind of do interrelate with each other, but one question here to go further into the latest program, the BYOD program, is when considering mass adoption of VPPs on a utility level, have there been methods considered of data processing that scale especially in parallel?
Sorry, say the last part again.
When considering mass adoption of VPPs on a utility level, have there been methods considered for data processing that scale especially on a parallel level? There's sort of a related question about, like, can the utilities consider the VPP power as firm and reliable? I think is what it's getting at, because there's two questions. But
I'll try to answer that as best I can. I think what we've seen from these programs operating in other states is that there's a very high level of predictability and performance from the programs, and utilities do rely on them. And I'll go back to the Massachusetts example for a second, and that one's been operating since, I think, 2018. It's branded as the Connected Solutions Program, and it's a summer peak reduction. And year after year, more and more customers enroll, and they see the performance of those batteries having a significant impact and a very real impact on bringing down costs for ratepayers. And when they dispatch those batteries, the aggregators bring the resource to bear, and it's quantifiable in terms of its performance.
Another question is getting at like that the programs seem to be designed for homes and small businesses, but are the programs also are larger users or larger system owners able to engage in the program? And I guess to one degree, like your max incentive under BYOD is capped at $500. So like I think right there's not that upfront incentive, but.
I can speak a little bit to that. So in the prior battery bonus program, the capacity limits were tied to the underlying tariff. So for example, if you were a CGS, customer grid supply, or a customer grid supply plus customer, or even a CSS customer, and wanted to install a larger, say you wanted to install it on your business, and you are still limited to the 100 kW cap. Whereas in this new BYOD program, you are not limited to a similar cap. So you can install, theoretically, many more batteries and more panels associated with that system. But again, in terms of the incentives, the question is whether the incentives are great enough to encourage businesses to want to do that in the first place. With respect to battery bonus, the incentives were there, right? There was the upfront incentive, the monthly incentive, plus at least for the initial couple of years, they would get retail rates if they were non-NEM customers. And so when they penciled out the math, there was an ROI, or return on investment, for doing that. With respect to BYOD, even though there's no cap theoretically on how many batteries and panels they can install, the value proposition's a little different based on the incentive scale right now.
So we heard from Governor Green that he's open to ideas that will get Hawaii to its energy goals. What impact do you think VPPs can contribute? Not only in terms of megawatt generation, but in terms of speed to deploy and cost, and what needs to change to allow VPPs to reach their potential in Hawaii?
Take the easier half of that. I mean, the Department of Energy is extremely bullish for exactly the reasons that we've discussed earlier around Hawaii leading on virtual power plants in the same way that Hawaii has proved to be a leader across many other topics. I was speaking with someone in the Southwest about virtual power plants, and they said, the reason why we can't get much virtual power plant adoption here in the Southwest is that our utility rates are just so cheap. So the benefit to the consumer is something that, like, you don't actually, it doesn't move the needle for many of the consumers in that area. Whereas in Hawaii, like obviously when we're talking about 45 cents a kilowatt hour, like very quickly these numbers become meaningful to a very significant part of the population. Just off of that alone, there's a lot of reasons why VPP policies in Hawaii have the potential to really engage consumers quickly, and in a way that, as we saw with battery bonus, getting a lot of adoption quite quickly.
Yeah, I would add to that. I would agree with that, and just add to that I think the program structures are really important to create the kind of incentives for these customers to really want to participate. And in terms of the opportunities that they present, the VPPs present for Hawaii and accelerating our clean energy goals, I think that's a really important piece to think about as we look at VPPs here in Hawaii. But as Richard's slides were showing in the very beginning, kind of the opportunity for these resources to be a big part of the solution for meeting growing demand all across the country. And not only do they contribute, and we've seen in the battery bonus program as a great example of that, a significant amount of capacity, but they also provide a load sink. So as we think about Hawaii is a great example of a state with a high renewable penetration. The more batteries that we have on the grid, and specifically customer-sited batteries, the more ability that we have to take up that generation in periods where there's lower demand but higher renewable generation, and then shift that to periods when there is less renewable generation but higher demand. And so we have all of a sudden a lot more controllability of what is otherwise an intermittent or variable resource, and we can start to control it a lot better. That's a really, really important, seems like a basic thing because we all have seen the duck curve so often, but it's so important to be able to show that we can do that for other states that are looking at, you know, very low renewable penetration levels, but having a lot of concerns about how they manage those over time. VPPs are a great example of a resource, a program model that can help us, you know, achieve those goals.
I think it's really important to stress in this point of time that the trends that I was describing earlier around, you know, why do people buy smart thermostats? Why do people buy electric vehicles, right? These are reasons that people are buying these things independent of whatever the monetary value they might be getting from a grid resource standpoint, right? These trends are happening whether we are talking about this topic or not. The question for us in Hawaii is, do we want to take advantage of this resource that people are paying for and actually be able to use it from a grid standpoint? And it just strikes me as a tremendous shame if, you know, I heard this, I don't know if it's true, but I did hear that last year Tesla might have outsold Toyotas in Hawaii. And like gauging from the lines, you know, waiting at Punahou, like certainly feels that way. I would say that I was just thinking about that EV charging demand that we're all adding to the grid collectively, as well as just the tragedy that'll occur if we don't start thinking about how do we manage that in a way that's actually going to work for all of us societally.
Totally. I was going to say, like, just show of hands, who in the audience has an EV car? Yeah, it seems like it's like close to 50%, although there's not that many people and it is an energy conference. But nonetheless, you know, the trend is up on these types of vehicles and just, you know, other loads in your house. At the same time, there's other things that are, you know, coming down, like there's energy efficiency and there's heat pumps. And so it's a combination of all of these things. One point I wanted Beren to like clarify to everyone too is one simple thing would be to, you know, the programs need to have the right incentives to attract anyone. But currently there's a difference between aggregators versus, you know, individual customers. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit because that's a nuance that I think in terms of what needs to change.
Right. That was the second part of your question.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think Will spoke to on his slide too, and it's a really important point, and that is these programs, it's really important that they're designed to enable that aggregator participation. And the aggregator is, you know, it could be an OEM provider or another type of third party that manages a fleet of customer-sited resources participation in the program. And currently, the program payments are only able to be delivered to the customer itself. However, the customer's participation is enabled by this other entity, and they have costs. They have ongoing costs for maintaining the system and for maintaining the back-end systems that allow those systems to actually operate in the program. And so it's really important that the program payment structure is set up to allow customers to be able to assign those program payments to their aggregator, and then contract privately with their aggregator for how much the customer actually receives on those things. And that's how so many of these programs operate across the country, and we've seen that to be, you know, a successful and important program design.
Yeah, so we've got like just less than a minute left, and I know everyone, it's like late in the day, so we probably want to wrap it up, but I feel like this has been great. And, you know, we all have Governor Green's number, so if we all just kind of text him and say, you know, what about VPPs? Maybe we should have Beren sit down and this panel just sit down with the governor for a cocktail and talk about this. I think that we certainly could, you know, make a big dent. If you think about, there's probably 60,000 net metered systems on Oahu. If we, you know, enrolled even half of those with a battery and connected them to a VPP program, it would be a really significant amount of energy.
Yeah, it would certainly help with diversification. I mean, I do a lot of work in the utility scale space, and I think many agree that diversification is really important, especially when we're talking about reliability and resiliency, and VPP is just another source of enhancing that reliability and resiliency.
Well, I think it's time for us to adjourn. And thank you for your attention. And text Governor Green. Tell him, what about VPPs?
Mahalo to the session participants, and thank you for attending day one of the 11th Annual Hawai'i Energy Conference.